Last weekend, I ran a 2:29 marathon over in Houston, Texas, baby, at the Houston Marathon. That time fell short of my goals by quite a few minutes, but I wouldn't change a single thing, because without that experience, I wouldn't have the invaluable knowledge that I now have because of it. Sometimes you only learn from failing. And I'm not even calling this one a failure, because by running the race the way I did, I now have the information that I need to go and smash that Olympic qualifying time next time around. So today, I'm going to explain what all that means and talk you through the whole thing. I'm going to talk you through my training block, my mileage, how I leveled this training block, and learned so much more about how to prepare for the beast that is the marathon. And I'm going to throw a few tips in there too. I'm going to explain the importance of the work that I did with my sports psychologist throughout this whole training block. I'll also talk through what my goals were for this race. The time-based goals, the race strategy, but also the goals that aren't rooted in the finish time and why these are so important. Obviously, I'm going to talk through the race itself and give you a really rich recap of what I was thinking and feeling at different points in the race. You're going to hear what I've learned from that race and why I have zero regrets from missing that goal time. And at the end of today's video, there will be a very exciting announcement about the new merch drop. Shh, so stick around for that. That's quite a lot, isn't it? It's actually made me a bit hungry. Chef?
Yep.
Is my lunch ready?
Oui. Chef Daniel at your service.
Ooh, a little bit. Beautiful. Not bad. So, the training block. I typically work off a 14-week marathon training block, but having said that, the first couple of weeks always feel not that different to just training in general. It's not like I'm not doing anything the rest of the time. But this time around, I started my block at altitude, which was something I haven't done before. And I had a really good time out in Font Romeu. 5 really solid weeks of training, good vibes, good weather, good company, zero complaints. And if I look here at the first 5 weeks of my training block, this is probably my most proudest Excel spreadsheet creation. It's not that high tech, but it's personal, and it's my comparison of the 3 marathon blocks I've done. So if you're lucky, in a few minutes, I'll actually share this with you when I get to the end of the training block to kind of compare across the piece. Seville, Copenhagen, Houston. Got up to 93 miles in my 3rd week of Font, which was peak mileage for that sort of 5-week section, and 2 20-mile long runs, which is earlier than I've done the long runs at this point in the block. Took me 5 weeks to get up to 20 miles in the Seville block, 6 weeks in the Copenhagen block, and I did this in week 3 and week 5 of the Houston block. So what does that tell me? That I'm able to push the needle a little bit further on the mileage front, on the long run front, and obviously staying injury free in the process. Then I came home from Font Romeu, and I got sick. Twice. And it happens. You don't plan to get sick in a marathon block, but I would put money on it happening because it's happened every single time around. Can you completely prevent that? No. There are things you can do to reduce the likelihood of getting sick, washing your hands regularly, making sure you're having a really good sleep cycle, your diet's good, you're doing all of those protective things. But ultimately though, if someone nearby has a sickness and you pick it up, it's bad luck, it happens. I'm using a gym, I'm not becoming a recluse and not seeing people the whole time for 14 weeks, because that would be really bad for my mental health. And actually, I'm blaming Daniel for this one, because he got a cold and he gave it to me. But we live together, so not much you can do about it. So I took a bit of a hit to the fitness, but nothing that we can't deal with, nothing that we haven't dealt with before, and by the time I got out to Flagstaff, I was still not feeling great because I'd felt that hit, but we were starting to turn a corner. First week out in Flagstaff, I took pretty easy. I always do that at altitude because you're adjusting to the altitude, especially going to Flag, it's quite a big travel to deal with as well. Didn't feel great that week, but still managed to get a decent level of mileage in and a long-ish long run. And then after that, things really started to click. The paces I was running in my sessions were feeling more controlled, coming to me easier, even though I was at altitude, dropping down to Camp Verde at lower altitude for some of those harder sessions. My fueling felt second nature, and I think this is a testament to the hard work I'd put in the last training block, that this time around I was practicing my drinks and getting them out once a week, but I didn't feel like I needed to really think about it, which is exactly where you want to be. So my top tip for you guys is if you have a marathon coming up, start practicing training as early as possible. If you can get into a real good rhythm and your stomach agrees with it in the early stages, you're doing something right. And my body was coping with much higher mileage. I hit 100 miles in this block as my peak week, and my body was dealing with it. So really, other than getting sick, I wouldn't change anything in the block. And as I say, you can't completely control that. Here's the table, the comparison of block to block to block. I'm sharing my mileage totals with you and my long run totals, and you can see down the bottom here that I've got the average week, which I think is really important because yes, you can sing and dance and scream and shout about hitting 100 miles. That's great and it's a cool number, but really it's about consistency, and we drill this into people all the time as coaches, as athletes, but that really is the golden ticket. It's not sexy, it's not glamorous, but getting those weeks in, the workouts, the long runs, and just being kind of here is what gets you fit. And I think that's what I did really, really well this time around. My average week was 79 miles, which doesn't sound like much compared to that 100-mile week, but it's 10 miles higher than my average for the block before that, which was 6 or 7 miles higher than the average for my first block. So we're gently moving the needle, and the great thing is that there's a room to push this on for next time. So before I get onto the race itself, what the plan was for the race and how the race actually went, and recapping the race, I want to talk about sports psychology because it's something that I've spent so much time on, and I now consider it part of my training because, well, if you have a bad session and then you come back the following week and do the same session and it goes really, really well, what actually has physically changed in that time? Maybe the conditions, but probably not your fitness, and potentially your mindset. So that's something that I really wanted to tap into more and more this block, and I've been working with my sports psych for a couple of years now, and I really find it to be a valuable thing for me because it's getting yourself in charge of your own mindset, especially when it's really freaking hard. And I have what's called my marathon mindset, which is basically me just being really dialed in on what I'm doing, what the purpose of that is, and staying on top of all the little things. Sleep, nutrition, hydration, pacing, just being smart about stuff, basically. So I got into that zone really, really well this block, and instead of just having my sports psych every 2 to 3 weeks, in the last 6 weeks I had a call once a week, which meant that we could just up the intensity a little bit and delve a little bit deeper. And we'll go into specific sessions, key long runs, where my mindset was at in those. If it was a good session, great. Where did I go and what was helpful about where I went? And if it wasn't such a good session but I got through it, what helped me navigate that? And it's tuning into those things, turning them into tools that are going to then help you on race day. And I really think it's changed me as an athlete, which I'll get onto a little bit later on. But I think that the reason that I was able to learn from the experience of this race and turn a negative into a positive is because of the work that I've done with my sports psych. So thanks, Leah. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that marathon mindset when I get to my race strategy and race plan in a moment, because you'll see that a lot of that plan is actually what's going on up here and the legs just doing their thing. And speaking of legs, I actually need to go for a run. So, shall we? Come on then, the sun is shining. I need to actually take the camera with me, don't I? What am I like? Let's go activate. So what were my goals going into this race? Well, I'll tell you. So as a lot of you will know, when I go into a big race that I've got some big goals for, you always have the top goal, the one that on a perfect day, that you're perfect, the conditions are perfect, and all the stars align, which is rare, and it's meant to be rare, because the A goal is meant to be hard. We're not meant to get A's every day. That's the A goal. And I work backwards from that to have a B goal and a C goal so that there's more than one option for success. And because my success doesn't lie in just hitting that one top time, because we're more complex than that. And there's so many other things that you should be measuring your success on. So the A goal for this race was to run in the region of 225 to 2:26. And that's a steep goal. That's 3-4 minutes quicker than the time I ran in Copenhagen, where I ran 5 minutes quicker than the time I'd ran the marathon before that. So, you know, that's where we thought on the best possible day that was possible. The B goal was to just hit the Olympic qualifying time, which was 2:26.50. And I say just hit the Olympic qualifying time. There's only a handful of British women ever that have run that fast. Go on, Daniel, tell us how many British women ever have run under 2:26.50, please. And so my C goal on the time front, after much convincing from my coach, was to say, you know, 2:28 would still be B+. So let's just say C goal, run a PB. Foreshadowing. Woo. On top of that, we set process goals, and those are important, again, because it's a different way to measure success. So some of my process goals were breaking the race down into segments and focusing on what I had decided to focus on in that chunk, which I'll get to. Successfully picking up my drinks and drinking as much as possible of those drinks in the bottle. And this one almost always goes in my process goals, but that's to have a good time and to enjoy myself. I wanted to just take in as much as possible from this race, because allowing myself to do that allows me to learn, get experience from it, and also to enjoy what I'm bloody doing. What's the point in doing it if you're not enjoying yourself? So with these goals in mind, after sitting down with my coach, I then sat down with my sports psych to work these goals into the race strategy and where my mindset was going to be at different points in the race, and planning for that. Oh dang, she's a sweat one. Do I have a Sula? I think the answer to that question is yes. So in terms of the race plan, I have a lot of detail on this, so I want to let you kind of look at it rather than me talking through every single bit of it, because I would be here all day if I was to do that. This is something that I worked on with my sports psych. We spent an hour basically just breaking the whole day down. So I've got even down to my warm up and being on the start line. And if you've been following my Instagram race recap videos, I'm basically doing one video on each of these chunks. So if you don't follow me on Instagram, go and do that. And I've also started making TikToks, which are just, yeah, I wouldn't bother. Don't follow me on TikTok. They're and yeah. If you think I'm unfiltered anyway in my content, on TikTok, it's on another level. Anyway, I'll skip past the warm up and the start line. You can look at that if you'd like. That's essentially me just kind of calming myself down and getting in the zone. And then these are the chunks that I broke the race down into. The first 7.6 miles, which seems like a random number, but at 7.6 miles, the half marathon runners go straight and the marathon runners peel off. So we chose that as a poignant moment that it may be worth being aware of and just sort of finding my baseline again after that point, because the race may look very different if some of my company has gone off to finish the half marathon. I'll pull out some of the most important stuff. You'll see throughout this plan the words relax, rhythm, flow. That's one of my favorite mantras. It works for me, it really calms me down, and it tells me to get into that flow state and just be there. So after that, note to myself to just kind of check in and see how I'm feeling at the 7.6 mark. We've got 7.6 miles to 13.1, which is obviously the halfway point. Much of the same again, we're in that flow state, and don't forget at this point, for all of these chunks so far, my expectation is that I would be with the pacemaker, which, spoiler alert, wasn't the case. I'll get to that in the recap itself. At 13.1, I am telling myself to smile. I always do that at halfway, a little celebration that you've done half of it, even though most of the hard work is still to come. But that's a nod to that enjoyment side of it. And then we've got 13.1 to 20, which I suppose is that penultimate chunk where it might be starting to get harder. Important to trust myself, trust my pacing. These are all the things that I want to be saying to myself in the race. Hence, having the plan written out and me sort of rehearsing this before the race, visualizing it all. And then we have the last 10K, which if you've ever run a marathon, you know is often the hardest part. So that's where we dig a little deeper and we get emotional. I'm imagining Daniel and my coach cheering me on and what they would be saying, breaking it down to smaller chunks if I need to. So the next mile, the next corner. And in a nutshell, that was the plan. which means it's time to talk about the race itself. These little mics are way too fun. Look how cute it is. The race. The race. Where to start talking about the race? Well, I guess I should start at the beginning. So I got up, got my breakfast in, left the hotel at about 5:25, and then had some time to kill. Warm-up wise, 8 minutes, easy jog, 1 mile that is, so that's super slow for me. And then just minimal drills and strides so that you're conserving as much energy as possible for the marathon you're about to run. I'm feeling positive, confident, excited, nervous, and also cold. It was about 5 degrees when we were on the start line, and it was pretty windy. Not ideal conditions, but hey, they're the same conditions for everyone, so you can't really complain too much. The good thing though about being nervous or excited or worrying in any way and feeling any type of way is that once the gun goes off, all of that is gone. They played us a couple of Texas party songs, gave us a countdown, and we were off. So from the start, I settled into that plan, which was to run with the pacemaker, whose job it was to run roughly 2:26, which is what we'd agreed the night before with a group of women. He went out a little bit too fast, in all honesty. Lovely guy, had never done any pacemaking before. After 3 miles, that pace hadn't really settled down, and I decided to trust myself rather than continuing to commit to running at this pace with the pacemaker, which after 3 miles, we were averaging a pace that was equivalent to running 2:24. And that's just a bit hot for me. I dropped back. That was what my instincts were telling me to do, and I just wholeheartedly trusted that decision. And I believe it was the right one. Because after dropping back ever so gradually and ever so slightly, I found myself a nice group to work with, and I could tell that it was the right rhythm, we were locked in, and I felt super comfortable. This continued through 5K, through 10K and beyond. I picked up my drinks bottles seamlessly, I was getting them down the hatch. Everything was feeling business as usual. And the next significant point was that 7.6 mile point where the half marathon runners were going to continue straight and we peeled off to the right. And again, at this point, I was just really sticking to what I'd planned to do, what I'd written in my race plan. I noted that this was a point that I needed to refocus afterwards, check in with how I was feeling, kind of reset, get a new gauge on what my race was going to look like, the people around me, and I did that perfectly. I wonder when this will all start to unravel. At some point between that 7.6 mile marker, imaginary marker, where we split in directions, and the halfway mark, can't exactly remember when, but the group I was working with started to fall back a little bit. I could feel the pace slipping, and I knew that I needed to be super switched on about staying on top of my pace. So at that point, I made the decision to press on, I guess, but it wasn't necessarily me pressing, it was more my group drifting back. And I found a new group to run with. I ran with one of the German athletes who had her own pacemaker, and that was really my favorite group that I ran with from the whole race. I was really hoping that I'd have that to the end, but unfortunately, as we started to approach the half marathon mark, again, their pace started to lapse, and I had to kind of forge on ahead, actually alone this time, which was a lot earlier into the race than I expected. It was what it was, and I was willing to kind of forge on ahead. And then we went over a bridge, which I will say was the only hill in this race. It really is an amazingly flat course in Houston, but the half marathon point essentially takes you over this bridge that is quite a stinker of a hill. And at this point, I should say that the marathon in Houston in general, I think because of the time of day it is, and also because Houston is not a very pedestrianized kind of city, everyone drives everywhere, the spectator count was pretty low, especially in comparison to the marathons I've done before. There really wasn't a huge amount of an atmosphere, but the spectators that were there were amazing. So I come off the bridge, I'm over halfway, and I sort of find myself a group again. There's a Mexican lady with a pacer or another runner, it looks like, in front of her. They were getting a lot of cheers that suggested that anyway. I kind of latched onto the back of them, but at 25K or around that point was where the early stages of the marathon pain. I'd probably say that was the point at which my race started to fall apart. I find it hard to even say that the race fell apart because I'm really proud of it, but that's the point where the goalposts started shifting and we maybe started looking at B, C goal downwards rather than, you know, the perfect day scenario. I'm realizing that I need to maybe pull it back a little bit if I'm going to be able to sustain a pace for the rest of the race and it not going like this. I didn't panic, and I wholeheartedly believed and let myself believe this could be a bad patch. You can come out of a bad patch as quickly as you go into one, and I had to be optimistic about it for quite a long time. And then not long after this, I see Daniel, Helen, my coach, and our friends roughly around mile 15. And at this point, I want to say a huge shout out to someone who was really, really integral to this race, me being able to see my team more often, and that's Lisa. Lisa is one of my subscribers. I hope you're watching, Lisa. She lives about 3 hours out from the race, but she transported Daniel, Helen, our friends, and obviously herself as well, to see me at multiple points in the course. And because Houston's not a very easy city to get around on public transport and when the roads are closed, I would not have seen my people more than once or twice if Lisa wasn't there. So Lisa, thank you, you're amazing. And I've spoken to Daniel about this obviously after the race, but he said seeing me at 15 miles, both him and Helen could tell that I was working a little bit harder, and I mean, I was completely on my own at this point, and I didn't look maybe quite as happy as I had done earlier on in the race. Not completely beat and down in the dumps, but just a noticeable shift in my body language and how it looked like I was moving. And perhaps at this point, I'll show you my splits. Here we have the first 12 miles where we are locked in, living the dream, having a pretty good time. And then here we have the miles from 13 down to 21. And you can see that in comparison to the splits in the first half of the race, I've slipped considerably, but not disastrously. I can remember at that point thinking, just run the mile you're in. Again, it's so funny because this is a tool that I'd had in place ready for like the last 3 to 6 miles, but I'm using it for like from halfway onwards. Running the mile I was in, focusing on getting that as close as possible to the average time and fighting for every second. I'm kind of holding steady and rallying. I'm so proud of myself for that, because when you start seeing 5:48, 5:49 on the watch, the easiest thing to do in that scenario is just to give up. And I considered it. Maybe around 19, 20 miles, I really thought about stepping off the course. I played out that whole scenario of what that would look like. I'd step off the course, someone would have to come over and help me. I'd have to wait for the bus. My friends and family would be so worried about me, and then I'd have not finished this marathon. And I thought to myself, I'm not letting people down, and I am not letting myself down, because imagine going in to my next marathon knowing that the last one beat me and I didn't finish it. And I thought, not today. So I get through 21 with my fastest split in about 5 miles, 5:41. And boy, oh boy, is that wind still here. It was so windy in the last 5 miles of that race. Wide open, no one to run with, no coverage, the wind just sweeping through you. I moan about the wind on the best of days. It's exhausting to run in, but it really challenged me both mentally and physically to block that out and focus on my footsteps, my breathing, really just kind of G'ing myself up. And then at 22 miles, I think to myself, I've been doing really well with my drinks. That's really good. I've picked them all up. I feel well fueled. I don't feel sick, but I do feel like I really need a wee. And I thought, I'm also pretty cold. I wonder if just going for a wee right now will actually warm me up. There's no way I was gonna stop. I was either gonna hold this pee in and be a bit uncomfortable, or I was gonna pee. I'm not stopping for a portaloo or a porta potty. So I weed myself. For about 3 seconds, it did warm me up. This is probably too much information, but I don't care. And then after that, the wind chill on said pee had the opposite effect. And I was like, wow, my legs are really cold now. And then to be honest, the remainder of the race is all so jumbled up in my head. My memory of it is hazy. And I think that's what happens when you really get into the deepest, darkest pits of this is really hard now. I have like strobe light memories of how I was feeling, what I could see, things that stuck out to me. A couple of those are the people that were cheering me on. Although I say there really wasn't many spectators. The very few spectators that were there did a great job. There are a few people that were cheering me on that knew my name. They clearly watched the videos. People really cheering for me. I saw my friends again at mile 24 going absolutely nuts for me. And you get that energy. You absorb that. You take that on. It helps remind you that you're doing this more than just for you. You're doing it for them as well. And they're out here supporting you. So you've got to go and do your best. You can see here my last few splits where I'm really holding on for dear life. It was at this point where I started to crunch the numbers and started to figure out, okay, if I've just gone through mile 23, mile 24, I'm roughly running 5:40 something. What does that mean for my finish time? And it was about at mile 25 that I realized I'm gonna finish this thing. I could still run a PB, let's go. And that's also about that time that I saw Kafuzi cheering me on and running with me for what felt like about 300 meters, which really, really helped. Thank you. He was yelling at me saying, you look great, you've got this. I didn't necessarily believe all of those things, but it was going in. And I was like, thank you, thank you. And then the finish of this marathon is pretty cool. The half marathon finishers are on the left, on one side of the cones. They're running their 2 hour, 20 something minute half marathons. And then I was coming down on the right, on the other side of the cones, where the marathon finish was. So you've kind of got this momentum of shoals of people finishing on this side, and it does carry you on the other side. So I really dug deep at that point. I was able to pick it up a little bit, which I'm honestly astonished at. 5:43 for my last split. And then I saw the clock in the distance and it ticked over to 2:29 and I thought, oh boy, we are gonna really have to dig deep to run a PB here. And that's what I did. And we did it by the skin of my teeth. Little 2 seconds. I'd love to go sub 2:29 at that point, but whilst most of the goals were out the window, it was more about doing the best that I could in those circumstances. Crossing the line, biggest feeling of relief in my life. Crossing the line in Seville, oh my god, I'm a marathon runner, this is so surreal. Crossing the line in Copenhagen, what the hell just happened? Probably my best executed race at that point. Crossing the line in Houston, thank god. Thank god I finished this race. It didn't beat me. And then I kind of weaved my way out and went to find Helen and Daniel, who were literally walking right up to me. I could see a bit of dread sort of behind their eyes on their faces because they're so close to me. They know what I have worked for, what we wanted and what we were aiming for at this race. And I feel like in races where you don't do so well, people kind of anticipate a reaction. Maybe me being really upset, crying, moody, silent even, and just kind of like processing everything. And I felt for them in that moment. But I wasn't sad. I was laughing, joking around. Already I'd processed it during the race because I'd had plenty of time to do that. I suppose because I'd lived it and I'd run that race, I was just so proud of myself for finishing, and I already could respect and understand that I'd smashed so many goals before this, that the training block was amazing, and my mindset work that I'd done on just being positive when it's easier to be negative, and keeping going and adapting when the race really didn't go to plan from the start. I was just so proud of that. Helen gave me a big hug and she told me she was proud of me, that I toughed it out there, and she said something along the lines of, that's toughness. You can't teach that. I think there is an element of you can train that in yourself, but there's also a little bit of my personality coming out there that I'm not a quitter. I'm not gonna give up. I'm gonna be gutsy. And that part of me really showed up when I needed it to, which is really cool. What a whirlwind. What an emotional roller coaster. That was a lot. What has it taught me? It's taught me that I'm tougher than I thought I was. It's taught me that you can learn a lot about an event, the marathon, and about yourself when things don't go well. Probably more so than when they do go well. It's taught me that success is not black and white. That race was still a success in what I learnt about how I'm gonna run the next one. I'm gonna book my own pacemaker as well. That's a learning. Have that in my back pocket for next time. And it's taught me that there's only so much you can prepare for. On the day, there are so many unknowns, and yes, you can expect them, but you just never know how it's gonna go. And that's the marathon. That's why we keep coming back. It breaks hearts. It can make your day, and I love it. I love everything about it. Now, before I get into the merch announcement, I want to say a few quick thank yous to people that helped make this race happen and helped make it more fun by being there. To Daniel, for being my ride or die, for being behind the camera, making these videos so amazing, and cheering until your tonsils probably bleed.
Come on, fight for it, you warrior, come on!
Thank you. To my coach, Helen, for putting up with me, for forming the master plan and for being there and coaching me through it. Lisa, the banana bread legend, who carted around my team so that I could see you guys so often during the race. Stephen and Melissa, our friends that came to watch, and their friends too. All of you guys, whether you were there, spectating, supporting, screaming my name, or supporting us on the video afterwards, the comments have had me tearing up. The support has been unreal. And of course, my patrons as well, who have literally financially supported me through this training block and beyond. Thank you so much. Now about that second merchandise drop. Something else I've learned is that changing your business model from a print-on-demand merch business to a we're gonna order all the stuff and ship it out of our house model takes a little bit more time and effort than we previously thought. And we didn't leave ourselves enough time to get out before Christmas. We were away in America, and now we're ready to share it with you, and we have a launch date. From the 29th of February, you'll be able to buy new Love the Grind t-shirts and running tees and running singlets. I cannot wait to share the new designs with you. They are amazing. I'm so excited for this drop. And you've been asking for a running kit for ages, and we've made it happen. And we also have a new lifestyle tee to bring to you. And the designs are just so cool. So mark your diaries. 29th of February, it's a leap year, baby. We're making it happen on that extra day. And patrons, you guys are gonna get it a week early. So we're gonna launch it for you guys a week before everyone else, so that we can test run our shipping, and thanks for being the guinea pigs once again. Love the grind.